Is that it?
Yeah. And now, Steve, you
now I can start.
Begin.
Yeah. Good afternoon and good morning to those of you in the US. This is basically looking at what are the options around the world for various Run the Worldcon. You know, have we explored every avenue? So I'm going to go through a number. Of venues, looking at it, but remembering that no venue is perfect. Many have limitations, but often these can be got round, but not always, as you'll probably see on the first one I'm coming to. But choose a venue that will match your expected attendance, and there's some rough numbers in the slide for that. And basically, all the following venues could hold a Worldcon, but with compromises. Some of the compromises are much bigger than others. So the first venue I want to look at is Suntec in Singapore. It's a huge venue. It's got 12,000 square feet of exhibition space. It's got a tiered auditorium for over 4,000. It's got 30 meeting rooms that will hold close to 5,000. And then there's lots of concourse space for registration socializing. And it's in the center of Singapore, so there are hotel rooms nearby, and there are over 300 restaurants. Sounds perfect, doesn't it? The problem I have is that it could be too large in some respects, but the biggest problem is the venue is over 6 floors. And basically, I looked on the floor plans, and there's not a single elevator on the place. So I did talk to Chris, who's a Singapore resident, and he confirms this. There are a couple of very small VIP elevators that will take about 2 people and might just take a small Moby. But other than that, the only ones you've got are the freight elevators, which don't stop at all floors. So it's probably not a suitable site for a Worldcon these days, in that you basically has no access. So you remember, it's not just size that matters when you're looking at a venue. There are alternatives in the region. The SMX Convention Center in Manila basically could probably host a Worldcon in this area of the world, but you just don't fall in love with the one venue, because quite often it'll disappoint you. The next venue you want to look at is in South Africa, in Cape Town. That's the CETIC. Huge amount of exhibition space. The auditorium it has is small, 1,500, and it's got a number of meetings, 14 in the large capacity will seat 3,000, then it's got 10 smaller meeting rooms. Probably just about enough meeting rooms for a Worldcon. And again, it's got the concourse and lobby city space. And again, city centre location with hotels and restaurants nearby. And you can see the issue here. It's the auditorium. It's only 1,500 people, but you have a huge amount of exhibition space. And one of the halls is 3,000 square meters and is large enough to fit in a flat auditorium for about 2,500. It'll still leave you about 11,000 square meters of hall space in the other 8 halls. But so you could make this work. Flat is not ideal, but it has been done. Overall, kind of worked on a renovation, which was in Reno. Use a ballroom with a flat, largely flat main stage area, and it can be made to work. But this site, you probably get a 4,000 to 4,500 person Worldcon in there. Another African site is the GIG in Nairobi, Kenya. Very nice, very unusual architecture. Be a really great place. Lots of very sunny. It's got a huge amount of exhibition space, but it's all outdoors. They don't have any indoors exhibition space really. They have a tiered auditorium for 4,000, and it has 8 meeting rooms from 7 to 400, so about 2,100 people, and lots of open space for registration and socializing. From here is the most we've got to work with. There are too few program rooms, but this probably could be used by building some program space in the outdoor exhibition space, and the rain doesn't seem to be a problem to worry about. The real issue is exhibition space itself. There's no way to bring this indoors, but if you can provide enough security, this might work. But I'm sure art show people and dealers would really want you to have lots of security. So it would be a massive additional cost. But if you could probably host a 3,000 to 4,000 person Worldcon there. Another venue is ECC Berlin. We're going to Europe now. large amount of your space. It's got 4 auditoriums that will seat between 800 and over 1,000 people, totaling over 3,000. 8 meeting rooms in the 60 to 400 end, and 37 meeting rooms in the 30 to 40. So a lot of small meeting room, but it's got lobby and concourse space, and it has attached hotels a lot, which is large enough with suites that are large enough for parties. Again, the auditorium sizes are the main problem, but again, one of the 2 halls that comes with the venue, exhibition spaces, can be set up as an auditorium for 5,000. Again, largely flat, but you can use some of the exhibition space in one of the other flatter auditoriums, one of the 1,000-seater person one. So you could reduce this down to basically being a 6,700 square meter exhibition space, which is probably enough for a Worldcon. That's about 70,000 square feet. So it would give you a 5,000-seat auditorium, 10 large program rooms, and 37. So you could basically, it'd be a little tight on program rooms, but you'll probably get a 5,000 person Worldcon in there. Going to the south of the border in the US, we've got the Expo Center Norte in Sao Paulo, Brazil. It has a huge amount of exhibition space, 75,000 square meters. That's about 800,000 square foot. In the yellow hall, you can set up an auditorium, which can be racked and will seat 4,500. And it has 16 meeting rooms in the 150 to 225 capacity, total capacity about just under 3,000. And of course, it's got lobby space and registration space. You could fit in a Worldcon in this one, although you need to be using creative exhibition space to make use of the short form meeting rooms if you want to maximize capacity. Overall, this site is similar to that of Longcon and could be used with many of the same solutions by putting stuff into exhibition space. And you probably could get a 5,000 to 6,000 attendee Worldcon in there. And if you grow above 5,000, well, you could probably do some more in there. It's got a huge amount of exhibition space, but it'd be once more without ceilings to sort of turn an old attitude round. Another one we're going back is back to Africa, which is the Calibre in Katsina, Nigeria. As you can see, it looks like a really nice space, although middle of nowhere, so transport to the site may be an issue from hotels. But again, it has 8,000 square meter outdoor exhibition space, a 3,000 seat auditorium, 20 meeting rooms, and lobby and registration space. This is another difficult venue. However, the auditorium meeting rooms are okay for the size of Worldcon you might expect Nigeria set to 3,000. But the outdoor exhibition space again has issues with security. But here you do have a bit of an option. You could lose a third of your program space to bring it in, to bring the exhibition space indoors, at least the stuff you need to have indoors. This will reduce your capacity by about 50% to about 2,000. But in Nigeria, a 2,000 person Worldcon might be the best, as good as you can expect. So this would probably work. Another South African one is in Durban, which is the ICC in Durban. We have 6,000 square meter space, a 3,000 seat racked auditorium, and 15 meeting rooms, which will seat 2,000. And there's room for expansion into other hall space. Again, you can fit another Worldcon in here with the additional exhibition space available. Again, it's probably similar to Longcon. You can make creative use of the hall space. And at the moment, it probably stands about 4,000 person attendees for South Africa. You can probably increase that by being creative. Going to those of you who are in Lisbon, we look at the Lisbon Congress Centre in Portugal. It's quite a good one. It's 9,000 square meters. Again, the auditorium is a little small at 1,500. It's got 27 meeting rooms, totaling just under 4,000 rooms, and again, space for lobby and registration. Generally, the venue is large enough, but what you can do is there are 4 attached huge exhibition halls I didn't list and everything, which are each of 10,000 square meters. You could build a usable main stage in that auditorium and keep the Congress Centre's own auditorium as your second stage, in which case you could probably get a 6,000 attendee Worldcon in the Lisbon venue. Another one is a WTC, World Trade Center in Mexico City. There's a plan at the side of this one. It's got over nearly close to 14,000 square meters of exhibition space, so about 150,000 square feet. It's got a 7,500 seat auditorium. It's got 27 meeting rooms in the 50 to 800 person capacity, total of 5,000, and it's got lobby space for registration and socializing. It also has, on top of it, rather than attached, a 22-floor hotel with a huge number of hotel rooms, and it's a city centre location, again, good for restaurants and other hotels. You could probably easily seat a Worldcon here of the same size as CTEC, about 8,000 NTs, but unlike CTEC, it boasts 37 elevators. So making access very easy, and it's spread just across 3 floors, which also makes transport better. So the hotel is huge. So if we were happy going to Mexico City, and it's a good place for restaurants and touristing. So the final one is estimating your convention size. I've always run to a rule of thumb, which is basically the formula you see there, where basically NT is the size of your national convention, preferably the size when it's held in the host city. LC is your local population, i.e. the number of people who could actually commute daily to your host venue. REGI is the regional convention, i.e. population that could travel to the host city within about a 3-hour, 4-hour journey direct without having to make too many changes. And then basically IT, international travelers, which tend to be about 1,000 reliable outside the US, or about 500 if you're inside the US. And this more or less works out for most Worldcons. It fell apart slightly for Dublin, where we had a lot more international travellers than I would normally expect, but the actual rest held up for the regional and the locals. And that's about it. So questions now. Let's have a look. I can see there are some.
There are some comments in the chat, but no questions.
Yeah.
Is there, there's a comments about, outdoor exhibition, that being problematic for art. Did you want to open things up for discussion, Steve?
Yeah, I'm happy to open it up for discussion.
Yeah, and if people want Steve to go back and talk about any of the other sites, that's something we could do as well.
Yeah, and I should introduce myself. Sorry, I assume everybody knew me. Probably do from people with faces I can actually see on here. I'm Steve Cooper. I was co-chair of Worldcon 3, facilities head for Dublin, and I'm going to be the treasurer for Glasgow 2024.
So you do now have the ability to unmute yourself. So if you have questions, if you want Steve to go back and sort of talk about a particular site again that caught your eye, you could either put that in the chat or unmute to ask about it, or we can close the slide share and people can just have a conversation if they're so inclined. Question, in your opinion, how unattractive or problematic are split facilities? Why don't you turn off the slides for now, Steve? You can
I think that's
bring them back up later if we need them.
Right, a second. We just.
Nope, now you've muted yourself.
I did that, but all right, I'm back on again. Yeah, it's something I've had experience of. I think split facilities can be made to work if you have the transport or their location. In that there's another Dublin bid in the works. I'm hopeful that they will have a much better site for 2029, because there's a new set of academic college buildings being built close to the CCD that hopefully they can get this time. We couldn't get them last time because they moved the exam period onto us. So you can make a split site work. You just need to allow time for it, and you need to allow time. In that way, we made it work for Dublin was we actually staggered the events, so that the events in the Gibson area by the Odeon were running half an hour different to the items that were actually in the CCD, to give people time when one item finished in the CCD to actually get to the Odeon if they needed to for the next item.
Although this is Tammy, as I will, that ended up not actually being particularly helpful because of the need to queue. So had you been able to get to the other venue and then walk into an item, then the shifting would have worked. But in the end, it actually probably worked against us a little bit because you were never able to just walk into items.
Yeah, that's down to a different question for the facilities is queuing, and that's one of the big problems I think you'll get in most. In that, I remember there were queues in Helsinki, there were queues in Dublin. There were queues to a certain degree in Interaction in Glasgow and at Worldcon itself, basically, even though the size of the program spaces. It's one of the things I did when I was saying working out what facilities you need. Outside of North America, you probably need program space for at least two-thirds of your attendees at any one time, in that a huge number of people tend to go to program in Europe and around the world. So different location for the Hugos, for instance. Yeah, that may well be to do that. I don't think we're going to need to do it for me once. I can imagine the places that are coming up for the vote. Although I was watching the Chengdu presentation, and they were talking about hoping to get 100,000 people, and then they were talking about having a 2,000 to 2,500 person space for their Hugos, which seemed a little small if they got the 100,000 they were hoping for. So that probably needs, they will probably need to move to somewhere else. They do get anywhere near that number, they'll need a 30,000 auditorium.
And I suspect that their perception of like who would attend the Hugos versus who would engage with the convention in a different way is very different from our model, right? They're not expecting 100,000 members of a Worldcon in the way we think of members of a Worldcon.
Probably people who turn up for a day or something like that, rather than
right.
that.
Right.
Although given that it was the Hugos that seemed to actually spark interest in Chinese fandom for the Worldcon, they may well be very interested in attending the Hugos, especially as they would have been majority voters in it.
Right. Vincent has dropped a new location into the chat. I don't know if you want to try to do one on the fly, Steve, but I do also have a question for you if not.
I probably won't look at that one on the thing because it takes me about an hour even for the brief stuff I was going over there, sort of thing, and that's just finding a way around. A lot of these sites are not user friendly. That is one thing I would actually compliment Suntech on. Their venue may be terrible for people in wheelchairs, but their website is very good from an access point of view. I could find my way around it very easily, floor plans, everything I could possibly need.
So I had a question for you, Steve. Of the sites that you talked about, which one, if you had to use one of them to run a Worldcon, which one would it be and why?
I would probably go for, let me just see, I've got two, I think. Let me just find them.
And if you want to share the screen again to show them to us as you talk about them, that's fine too.
The two that I think could most successfully run a Worldcon are actually Lisbon itself. Is that, as I say, the actual venue itself is quite large, and you have a huge exhibition centre next door to it where you could actually run the Hugos and stuff like that. So answering a bit of Chris's thing about a split site, in that it's not part of the actual convention centre, it's an exhibition centre that is literally next door to the convention centre, and that's where you'd have your main stage and you'd run those. It would be slightly split, but the rest of it would all be in one site.
And which site in particular were you talking about for Lisbon? Miguel,
I'll tell you that in a second. It's the Lisbon Congress Center.
Okay.
Centro de Congresso de Lisboa. That's one. And then if I wanted to go further afield, actually, I would really like to run a Worldcon in Mexico, and at Mexico City. And that venue looks really good. Again, it's got everything you want. It's good for access. It's got space to put in all the auditoriums you want, and the program space, exhibition space. It's got everything you want. It's just, does Mexico City itself have the reputation that fans would want to go to? And I know it is supposed to be the crime capital of Central America, so.
James, do you want to unmute and tell us about why the Portuguese fans are dying here? Or Miguel, do you want to tell us, what do we not know about? I assume you're dying because you're like oh, that site could never host a Worldcon, or you're dying because you think we're going to make you run a Worldcon. I don't know why you're dying. So James, unmute and tell us what's going on.
Yeah, so we're just here in the bar enjoying a few beers, and Miguel straight away says, I need to tell Rogerio straight away that we have a Worldcon venue, and he's on the phone. I'm going to share the picture on Discord. Oh, yeah. But he's refusing to pick up. Rogerio had to step out for a bit. So it's there's a mixture of excitement and
Panic.
because we didn't hear the venue that Steve was talking about. That's why Miguel was going, which venue? So
okay.
Yeah,
I can bring that back up again, actually. Let me just go back to share, if I can just figure out how to share screen.
Yeah, so there it is.
There it is. There's actual convention center itself, and they say then there's an exhibition center right next door. The convention center has 9,000 square feet of exhibition space, more than enough you need for art show, dealers, exhibitions. It only has a 15,000 seat auditorium. Plus, you have the exhibition center next door, which has 4 10,000 square meter halls, where you can easily build your main stage into one of those and have that for your main stage, and then use the 1,500 seat auditorium as your second stage. And then it's got 27 meeting rooms, which is plenty, in the range of 50 to 400, which will seat nearly 4,000 people, more than enough. You can probably say you could easily get a 6,000 person Worldcon into the Lisbon Centre.
Okay, do you want to turn off the share and we can chat some more?
Yeah.
So James had a question, and I would actually open this up for other people to participate in as well after Steve has answered it. So if you would like to address this question, raise your hand. But James, or was it Vincent, asked, do Worldcon fans need to change their bias or expectations to be truly worldwide? Right? We're sort of saying, can we fit the Worldcon as it is into these sites? And do we have to choose sites that only the Worldcon as it is could exist in? Thoughts on that? And then I would love to hear from others, especially people who don't live in traditional Worldcon sites. Steve, thoughts?
All right. I think we do need to widen our venue in that outside of Europe, outside the English-speaking world, and I would include Finland in the English-speaking world, to be honest, because there's lots of people will speak English. Where you go into somewhere where English isn't a large second language, at least. There's really only been the one Worldcon in recent times, and that was Japan. Other than that, we have not had any Worldcon outside of Europe or the United States or Australia, or possibly we would have been in New Zealand, but that's the same sort of area. So yeah, I would like to see Worldcon actually become really worldwide. And I say Mexico would probably be a good start for a worldwide one. The simple reason that you're close enough to North America to pick up the North American fans. And it's one of those cities that actually has got good connections to Europe as well. And then we've also never been south of Europe, so Lisbon again would be another good thing, at least from a European point of view. It would get us into Southern Europe rather than always being in North and Western Europe.
Muting myself. Anybody else want to weigh in on this? We are open for discussion if people are interested in weighing in.
Oh, home pasty dynasty.
Chris, do you want to unmute yourself and chat, or are you not in a place where you can do that?
If I may, it's Martin speaking. I was thinking about this question from James that you a little bit rephrased, Tammy. I think that definitely Worldcon should become more world convention than having just the name. And I think that Helsinki was aiming into this direction, and they did quite a good job in this regard. However, at the same time, we cannot change Worldcon too much, so that it will not resemble Worldcon anymore. So if you're saying that we need to resign from certain aspects of Worldcon, that's okay. But if we will resign of too many, then it will be just a convention of the same name taking place somewhere else. So this is something to also remember, that, I'm completely up to, having Worldcon in different countries, but at the same time to have something that, that will keep the same convention.
Yeah, and in some ways I agree with that, and it's probably my major concern about the Chengdu bid, is that I think Worldcon there would be very different from what we're used to from a Worldcon point of view, as in it would be hard to recognize. To some extent, Japan was in some ways similar, but that was not as different. But the Chengdu one, you'd be heading more towards a gate show for the Worldcon itself, with if they got the people in they expected. In that, I wouldn't want to run a convention for 100,000. Whereas both Lisbon and Mexico City are venues where you could run, and you are a traditional Worldcon. You've got traditional fans, and you've got a traditional venue. So you're extending the geographic locations, but you're not changing the convention itself out of sight, basically.
Chris, you were having lots of opinions in the chat. If you wanted to talk, that would be great.
Okay, so I have to be a little bit quiet because I've got a baby next door and I'm on sleep duty tonight. I also, looked at the Chengdu presentation, and I was a little bit confused by how they were laying out their prospective plans for a Worldcon, as opposed to just another Chinese science fiction convention. I've been to a couple in mainland China, and they're a different kind of animal. They're definitely. But they're definitely more geared towards working professionals, like the academics, the authors, the artists, and the fans are there to consume. They're much less interactive than our Worldcon audience. Having said that, they do pull in huge numbers. The content they're producing is interesting and very different than what we're experiencing in English-based science fiction, and it's spreading, through other mediums such as movies and Netflix and whatnot. So it would be good to see that, see if we can find a middle ground between the two. I don't want to criticize you specifically, Tammy, because I think you did a good job moderating the panel in general. But there were times when the questions you asked were very, if you're not one of us, what are you doing here, leaning. I mean, the very first question you started off with was a gatekeeping question, which is fair, but there are ways to phrase it to make it sound like, oh, if you have no Worldcon experience, what are you doing here?
Right, and as it came out of my mouth, I realized like I didn't phrase it the way I wanted to, but because I do think that other types of experience are important too.
Exactly, but there was a way to say that question to emphasize that, and unfortunately, because look, again, I know you a little bit, so I know you're absolutely in the right place. I'm not trying to call you out of this. Yeah. I'm just saying that just watching it from a remote point of view, if we want to make Worldcon this inclusive thing, we need to find a way to open it up to the world. As Steve said, it would be great to see this in different countries. I've spent the last 10 years, since I participated in my first Worldcon, looking around Southeast Asia to see if there was somewhere where we could do a traditional Worldcon. And there are vanishingly few places, not just because of venue space, as he mentioned, Suntec and Manila, which is another suggestion of mine, but because of the political climate. I mean, LGBTQ is still not hugely supported in a lot of the countries around here.
Hold on one second. Hold on one second, Chris. Steve, can you stop the share so people can see Chris more effectively while he's speaking?
It's just somebody has to share.
No, I said we'd bring that up later. We'll bring it back up once the conversation's done.
All right, yeah.
So I think that beyond the physical facilities, there are other considerations. And again, there's 1,001 things that go into Worldcon, and I would love to see it in as many places as possible. But the reality of the situation is such that, I don't think we're going to see one in Jakarta anytime soon. I don't think we're going to see one in Hong Kong anytime soon, even though those are, again, very interesting places to hold them.
Excellent. Thank you for your input. All right. So there are a bunch of questions here that are about like, how do we define Worldcon? That's obviously outside the scope of this. We did have a request to put the Lisboa site back up on the screen for folks there. So now would be a fine time to do that, Steve.
Actually, I'm just to see if I can actually find their website again, sort of thing. I can put that up. You just give me a few seconds. This is our website. I'll see if I can find the plan site somewhere. I'll stay with this for a moment. So it's this gives you the sort of thing. Basically, there you have the convention center, which is just over here. And then right next door, you have this huge exhibition center, which has the large 10,000 square meter, 110,000 square feet halls, where you wouldn't use all the space, but you could build yourself a good main stage with lots of backstage space, everything you want basically there.
James, is that enough information for what you wanted back up on the screen? All right, I think, Steve, they're saying that's probably enough screen share happening.
Too many Lisbon fans fainting.
I don't know. James says there's much excitement happening, according to the chat. All right, did anyone have any further questions for Steve? Any other sites you would like him to track down and analyze later? If anyone is thinking about hosting a Worldcon in their location, maybe Steve could help guide you down that path or steer you away from it.
Yeah, and if you're serious about it, get in touch with me and I'll do a more detailed review than the ones I had basically. I only had basically a couple of days to put all this together from when I got all the suggestions of the various sites, and so having a look at them, basically I took about between an hour and 2 hours at each site sort of thing. I could probably spend a day looking at through the contents and trying to figure it out and finding out other sources.
And I think everyone who's ever tried to look for a site for a convention of any size knows that very often, you know, there's, oh, this is perfect on paper. And then you get into the space and you realize, oh, actually there's like a step between each of these things, or there's some other barrier. You know, there's a highway between this and the restaurants on the other side that I thought were going to be accessible or something like that. Yeah. So there's no replacement for actually getting on site and looking.
When I first saw the Suntec Center in Singapore, it looked really, really nice. And then I got to the floor plans and looking around, saying, there's lots of escalators, but where are the elevators? They're not marked. I just assumed they weren't marked, though they do have for each level, a 360 walk where you can walk around using the sort of Google walk where you can actually walk around the site sort of thing. And I still couldn't spot the the elevator. So I finally talked to Chris about this and he said, no, there aren't any. How you can build a 6-story convention center with no elevators, I do not know.
That is definitely surprising.
I mean, I can answer the question if you really want. I mean, it's not a. Essentially, it was built just long enough ago that access was not a huge concern. The Able-Bodied Disabilities Act wasn't invoked in Singapore until about 10, 12 years ago. So this was built about 25 years ago. There is some talk of, so essentially the point of that escalator access is so you go up via this, next to this huge glass wall that gives you the vista around you. I mean, if you remember the CCD in Dublin, you know, going up those short escalators, it's that times like 10. The feel of it. And since the main access to those halls is for large trade shows, they didn't think that they needed elevators apart from the freight elevators. There are VIP elevators specifically for the meeting room floors, but again, they're really meant for the cleaning staff and for the occasional VIP. So they will hold just about a wheelchair, like one wheelchair.
When you describe it, probably wouldn't even fit some of the larger Mobies in there.
Yeah, I don't think so. And frankly, there isn't a lot of mobile Mobi rental in Singapore.
You're all too healthy.
Which goes to the same thing people are, we were talking a little bit about before. There's the space, and then there's everything else that needs to be in place to support the space working as a site.
Get your $20 out. If you look at the chat.
Yes, there's much talking about $20 bills. All right, does anyone else have any questions? James had asked a question about any venues in Russia, Poland, or Lithuania. I don't know if that was directed at you, Steve, or as a general.
I've got no idea. I haven't looked.
You haven't looked, yeah.
There were almost certainly some in Russia. I don't know about Poland or Lithuania. But again, I think you run into the same problems we have with the Jedi bid last year, and what people are worried about in Chengdu this year of LGBT members. In that, you know, football worries enough about it going to Qatar next year, and football fans are not exactly known for their visible LGBTQ sensitivities, but.
If I may, about Poland, I believe that absolutely the best location we may have would be the International World Fair, or how it is called in English, in Poznań. I'm not sure what's the official English name. And they have a big, they have conference center and the big exhibition spaces, multiple ones. However, I believe that in terms of number of program rooms or program space, it may be too little. And the website is terrible right now. It was very nice some time ago. I was just trying to Google, and they splitted the whole website into part for the Congress Center and the First Center separately. And it means that if you need to find the numbers for the conference rooms, you need to check two websites with two different systems of how it is described. But it seems to be a little bit too small for the Worldcon type event, which is more on the programming. Our biggest Polish convention takes place there, and it's way bigger than Worldcon because it's over 50,000 people. But there is not enough of programming space for that, in my opinion.
For a Worldcon, you really want, for what you would probably get in Poland, which I would say would be a typically European one, you'd want 15 program rooms for 100 to 200 people, basically, to be ideal.
Right, I think that goes to the question that was asked in the chat about sort of what defines a Worldcon, and the things especially that feed into facilities about Worldcon is the Hugo Awards, obviously one, right? So you have to take that into account. But then also this expectation about how programming is consumed, and that it is more smaller items and fewer larger items has been our, excuse me, perception of what a Worldcon is. And so using some of these other sites might mean changing that perception that, could a Worldcon be just 3 or 4 items in an hour, but those can all seat 10,000 people in a large auditorium or something like that for something much larger.
I would actually go the other way, Tammy, and say that, while I love the Masquerade, I love the Hugo Awards, I mean, all these big items are the cherry on top of the cake that is the programming content. So I would say that the priority would be finding a space that can do multiple programming streams, even if it doesn't have that large auditorium, and we can then do that ceremony virtually.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you. I was just throwing out the question, like,
absolutely.
What's the priority? What's the focus?
And if you have the members and the, you can always find a solution to the main auditorium's problem. In that, one option for Dublin, which I haven't talked about it, but there is a large venue down actually at the same where the Odeon was. That's a 10,000 person auditorium, basically, that you'd need to do a lot more working to move it in there. But we all know the auditorium at Dublin at 2000 was too small. There are options, and people will quite happily, well, not quite happily, but I have quite often seen that the Hugo Awards, the main stage, has been separate from the main convention centre. I remember that was the same in Con Jose had a separate one, and it's been done in some other places as well, where basically you had in renovation in some ways. You had the main convention over at the Pepper Mill, and then you had the actual, I think it was the Pepper, or was it the other way around? But anyway, and then you had the actual Hugo Awards in a hotel that was, well, we needed a buzz to get to it, sort of thing. Between the two of them, we need to set the bus service. So it is possible, and people will accept, because it is a night out. People go dress up, go to the Hugos, so they don't mind going to another one, sort of going somewhere for that sort of thing.
Right. It just goes to the question of trying to figure out what is this thing that we're trying to do, so that that's how you can assess whether a site is appropriate or not, is having some sense of what the pieces of it are. And we may not all agree on what those important pieces are. That could be a whole program item of its own.
If you get the size of Chengdu is hoping for, you're probably looking at 15, 20 meeting rooms of 1,000 plus people for each meeting room.
All right, any other questions? We still have a few minutes in this, we still have 15 minutes in this item, but I firmly believe that program items should not be forced to fill their time if they have completed.
Steve, just a quick question. Regarding access, I mean, I know that we talked about Suntec not having access within the center itself, but for some of the other sites like Mexico City or the ones in South Africa, what about general accessibility within the city? How do we judge that? And how much of a factor should it play in?
That was actually a discussion. There was a discussion actually looking at EasterCon sites, which was cover this point directly, is that it's not just the venue you need to look at. You need to look at the surrounding area for an access point of view. Is how easy is it to get around? In that there was one venue that Vanessa could remember where she was bored of sitting in the hotel all the time, but she couldn't go out to the local restaurants because it all had a step to go up to them, basically. So you need to do, if you're going to do this, it's more than you can do online. You need, this is where your locals come in, is that they go around and they actually have a look at the site around it and find out what there is around there, what the hotels are like. Are the hotels accessible? What are the restaurants like? What is the actual general area for just getting between the hotels and the site? That's where the locals come in, basically. That you need people to go in there and look at that in detail before you bid, basically.
So I feel that this is actually one of the bigger limiting factors for moving Worldcon into these other locales, because, and not to you know, what's the word, bias, myself against first world, second world mentalities, but the level of access and facility and, in a lot of countries around, a lot of cities around the world, isn't up to London or New York or Chicago standards. It just isn't. I mean, getting around in Manila is tricky. Getting around Mexico City, I imagine, even more so.
Yeah, I don't know Mexico because it's not a city I've visited. But yeah.
This is just from hearsay. So I mean,
Yeah.
I don't have on the ground experience of Mexico City, but certainly in Manila, even as an able-bodied person running around, if the things are too far apart, it was difficult. So which is why finding somewhere that has it more or less all in one space, like the one I sent you, is more or less crucial. So it's doable, just tough to find.
Yeah, it varies, and it depends on the temperature. And that's Reno, which had 2 sites. Luckily, it was only for the Hugo, so it was the evening, so it wasn't too hot. But Reno is not a place you want to be walking between venues during the day itself.
Right, and that again brings back the question that people brought up in chat about, what are the requirements for a Worldcon site, and that must be accessible to people with accessibility difficulties, even in a country that doesn't support that. Is that something that we say, no, that's important to the Worldcon community, and that's part of our criteria? I think there could be a future program item at a SMOFCon that's kind of getting at that. What are the pieces that make a Worldcon that might be a useful tool for bidders to be thinking about things in addition to the facilities layout, but things like accessibility externally as well.
Yeah, I think our criteria are changing. Again, it was the EasterCon panel this morning looking at hotels, that the ones that are now bidding and looking into the future are dropping. So it used to be the old requirements. We must have a real ale bar. This is going to sound stupid for a lot of people. They must serve mushrooms with breakfast. Things like that were requirements. People had to go in there, and basically, if your hotel did not do mushrooms, you crossed it off the list and you went on to look for somewhere else. But those things have been dropped now, in that we're talking about, a real ale bar, which is probably a bigger thing, is not a hill to die on, in that people can get by without real ale for a few days, and they can always go out to a nearby pub if it becomes that desperate. Whereas access requirements, they are a hill to die on basically these days.
Well, I think that we're balancing different kinds of access here. By not ever having, Worldcon in whole vast swaths of the world, we are excluding the people that are there that can't travel far distances. So yes, it's good not to exclude anybody, but by making our criteria so that we won't exclude people in wheelchairs or mobies or blind people, we are at the same time excluding those other people in the other parts of the world that can't get to those places. So it's a balancing act. I'm not sure where the right balance is, but we need to be cognizant of that when we're making these decisions.
Absolutely. All right.
I think it may just come down to having to budget a lot more time and effort into making the facilities in these less than perfect venues, in less than perfect locales, accessible for the audience that we already have, because they're important to us.
Well, they are, but even if the venue is accessible, if the whole rest of the city is not, they're still not going to come, or they're going to have a lot of trouble.
Well, I think we can only extend our sphere of responsibility so far. As long as we take care of the immediate things that we have under our purview, and the lodging residences nearby, that is so that our people can attend our event, can go there, stay there, and attend our event. That is our responsibility. And if they want to visit the rest of the city, they have to make their own arrangements. Because I mean, again, it's a question of how much do you handhold as well.
Right, and I hear what Perianne is saying is, if you're bidding a site and you're saying this site doesn't have good accessibility, if you're in a Mobi, we recommend that you not plan to attend, but we still want to bid this site because there's this big population of people who are interested in attending and haven't ever been able to attend a Worldcon anywhere else. And so we're making that trade-off. We're prioritizing this sort of access versus the other sort of access.
Sure.
And that's a question, right? And how would the voters receive that? Yeah.
Again, as somebody who can't go to a lot of Worldcons because I am situated at the ass end of the world compared to Mr. Fandom, I definitely feel what you're saying, Perianne. The first one I went to was Australia, because that's the nearest to me, and that's still a 10-hour flight. but at the same time, you can't betray the entire 80-year history of Worldcon, all people who've worked on and attended and want to do that. I think there is a way to, and the question becomes not just why do we want those people to come to Worldcon, but what does having the Worldcon there bring to the rest of us, or the rest of the people who have been traditionally involved in Worldcon? I mean, if you have a Worldcon in Laos, I don't know how much local sci-fi content is going on there. It might be a fascinating place to visit, but in the sense of the content for our consumers, I don't think it's a great fit. As opposed to somewhere like Taiwan, or Hong Kong, or Malaysia, or Jakarta, or Indonesia, or Philippines, which have vibrant fandoms. There are other reasons not to go to those places, but again, those places at least have something to offer.
Right.
And again, have people who would want to go to a Worldcon, who want to participate in this.
Right, because James said in the chat, if a group of fans brought any of these venues forward, do we feel it would be supported? And I think a lot of the question about that is exactly what you raise. I mean, I know I wouldn't support one of these venues. I shouldn't say wouldn't, but I probably wouldn't support a venue where there wasn't a local fan group who wanted the convention to come there. I wouldn't want to be like, hey, we're going to take the Worldcon to this site without that presence for that interchange that you're talking about.
If most of the people haven't had the opportunity to go to a Worldcon so far away, again, it's in a way it's chicken and egg, how much. So yeah, I think the way forward always has been, or should have been, partnerships, collaborations. You bring us local expertise, we bring you the event expertise. And that's
right. Yep.
There's definitely, I think for next year's SMOFCon to talk about, as in balancing access needs, basically, and requirements, because you have the ones that are coming up in recent ones about LGBTQ plus. As a standard thing, you must have be in a venue in a location that is at least not unfriendly to LGBTQ. There is the thing of opening access to different groups compared to things, and balancing these things. Always have to know where do the priorities lie. Where you wouldn't want to do it every single time, but is it the case that one year you could prioritize giving access to people outside of the usual Worldcon sphere to bring it out but not deprioritize, but expect that basically there will be normal access issues basically that may not be you can't get around as much,
or just other things in general that are different from our typical model. And so that's of course something that bidders have to be able to address and have to make the case. And we as a community have to make the case to each other. Hey, this site might not have what you're looking for in terms of XYZ, but here's what it adds in terms of other things.
Yeah.
No, well, let's look at the fan village for the XL. I mean, that was a great addition. Which was an improvisation based on the space that was necessary.
Yep. And then was adopted in sites that typically would have a certain type of model, also could adopt that model as an alternative. And then probably just the existence of that has also got people thinking about ways to use exhibit spaces differently. So yeah, that's a great example, Chris, of the what going to sites, different kinds of sites can bring to the Worldcon as a community and as an institution. Yeah,
there are ways to use exhibition space that is available, sort of thing, and that you can put gaming, as we did on into the exhibition space, in that you just need to be able to put it somewhere that they're out of sight. You want to look at these games, but as long as they're out of sight, it's fine. So you put them in a marquee inside the exhibition hall.
If you can't look at the games, nobody's going to know what's available to play. I'm just saying.
No, look at the gamers. No, it was basically, rather than put them into some rooms in the usual program rooms, we built a marquee in the exhibition space and put the gaming in there.
Right, and I think that was fine, although you didn't have a lot of late night access for that, but
We wouldn't have had late night access in the rest of space either, sort of thing. It had as much, we had as much, in fact, we had
Yeah.
later access to the mission space than we had to the program space. So, and we went on to 2 o'clock most nights, sort of thing. So,
All right, any final questions or closing remarks? Well, thank you, Steve. We know you put a ton of work into putting all of those together. And thank you to Chris for being pulled in as an impromptu panelist on this one. Appreciate that.
Well, I mean, I was getting questions in preparation for this because Steve was asking me as the local Singapore resident, but so I'm happy that I was actually available and the kids so asleep enough for me to take 20 minutes to join in.
So thank you.
and thank you for Chris for surprising me with the answers about the Suntec Centre. They do have the space. They
I
could
really
build
wish
it.
there
They
was
could
a
build the
place.
elevator.
They could. I mean, like I said, that there is plans to do a full accessibility revamp of it within possibly the next 3 to 4 years. I don't know how that's been affected by COVID. Originally, it was supposed to be in place for the I don't know, World Bank conference that was supposed to happen last year and didn't. So yeah, it's an ongoing thing. It would please me greatly if there was somewhere in Singapore, good enough to host a Worldcon. There are other reasons why we shouldn't have it here, like the cost of it. But yeah.
Yeah, and you don't want to have people throwing $20 bills at you.
I'm very happy topping out area head. Thank you very much. Nothing higher than me. I do not aspire to such lofty heights.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a
Thank
great
you.
rest of your day. There are more panels still ahead.
Yeah.